When it comes to how Yu-Gi-Oh! Duel Monsters was altered for a large portion of its international releases, fans mostly focus on the script changes and visual edits that were done to explicitly alter content. Today we're going to be looking at something that may not have had such a widely polarizing effect, but definitely caused a divergence in the series' overall direction. And it all begins with the iconic rivalry, the very first duel, between Yugi and Joey on a school desk during lunch break.
Hey Joey! Earth to Joey! Hey, are you in there? It's your turn!
This whole classroom scene had no music in the original Japanese version. And while the dubbed version also has its moments without music, it's where exactly the cues land that matter. The silence of the original keeps Kaiba's motivation relatively ambiguous and subtle for now. Well, as subtle as you can get for a brooding teenager reading Nietzschean philosophy. But no, in the dub, Kaiba's not reading Nietzsche, and the low, sustained, unresolved cello cue makes him out to be a villain before we know anything about him.
Rare card. Could they have found the card that I've been searching for?
And this greatly affects the next scene. Both versions start off quite similar, with more casual sounding tracks.
Grandpa, I'm home!
However, funnily enough, while Kaiba's entrance into the shop signals the end of a music cue in the Japanese version, it prompts a new one to begin in the dub. Remember, the original is still treating Kaiba's motives as ambiguous at this point, and his presence in this scene is punctuated by these more impulsive interjections that stand out more against the silence. Heck, even as Sugoroku is explaining how important the Blue Eyes is, the harsh sound of the briefcase slamming shut prompts the tender piano music to stop. And again, Kaiba leaves the shop without musical accompaniment. By contrast, the dub gives almost every advance and response its own cue.
Hey, are you into Duel Monsters too? This is perfect. Maybe we could all duel together sometime.
Me? Duel you? I would have more of a challenge playing solitaire.
What?
When it comes to music for film and television, the first thing often discussed is the introduction, development, and association of leitmotifs. And even though this is evident in both versions of the series, for the sake of this video, I'm going to be focusing more on synchronicity. This whole interaction with Kaiba is a result of the fact that the US version has far tighter synchronicity of music cues than the Japanese. Something that's pretty much consistent throughout this show and basically every anime that received a redone score for American television. To put things into perspective, the tightest kind of musical synchronicity that exists is probably Mickey Mousing. Named after the character himself, Mickey Mousing refers to the assignment of music to movement on an exact kinesthetic level. But regardless, the dub maybe falls into some traps when it comes to the actual use of its musical synchronicity. Kaiba's butler in this scene has this Penderecki-style brass associated with him.
I'm afraid I must insist.
It's a cliché of cinematic scores as well, but in the context of this episode, it makes him out to be way more diabolical than Kaiba for no reason. Hobson does work for him, but come on, does he really seem that bad?
You're nice to Hobson. Hobson not smash you.
The Japanese version of this sequence is driven by a track called Approaching, which for the sake of this video has two main parts. The first is this gentle G minor piano line. And the second is this stabbing rhythm in the upper strings, on what I think is a C-sharp suspended chord with a flat 5. Either way, it's a crunchy dissonance that contrasts with a quiet sense of foreboding in the first part. The show alternates between these two parts and loops them accordingly. After Sugoroku leaves to duel Kaiba, we still get the first part of the track, bubbling away as Yuki and his friends casually walk home, oblivious to Kaiba's plans. It's a great way of maintaining momentum for the viewer without making things too jarring, keeping up anticipation for when the next big development happens.
Yugi-kun.
Kaiba-kun?
What does the 4Kids version do?
But I'll teach him a lesson about the heart of the cards.
Man, I hope he has some cool cards today.
Me too!
Yeah.
It forces itself to match the content blow for blow, and it's the instances like this which can make the dub come off as finicky or condescending. Granted, active synchronicity is a big part of producing successful music for film and television. Having certain elements timed at the exact right moment is key to a moving cinematic feel.
Use the Force, Luke. Let go.
No, don't!
The problem with Yu-Gi-Oh's American score, though, is that instead of using this to create subtext or a more overarching emotional payoff, too often it focuses on what is literally happening on screen. This makes it feel like more of a running commentary instead of actual accompaniment, which is especially true throughout a lot of the duel between Yugi and Kaiba itself.
I attack with the mighty Hitatsumi Giant.
Everything from the summons to the attacks to the magic cards prompts the music to change, turning the duel into a non-stop stream of transitions with no room to breathe until the ad break.
This card is priceless. There are only 4.
While the 4Kids version does have silence, it doesn't really know how to use it like the Japanese version. Although I guess you could argue it uses silence to set up these quote-unquote shock moments, both here
Ah, Yugi, perfect.
Kaiba?
and here. When I watched the show as a kid, this ever-changing music was no doubt what kept me and so many others engaged, especially when it would play up the Egyptian aspect of the plot, arguably to a greater extent than the Japanese, though let's save that for another video. However, to the dub's credit, there are a few little recurring motifs and ideas that help tie this episode together a bit. Sometimes when we cut back to Yugi, we get a brief little oboe excerpt to contrast to the intensity of the action.
So this is how you beat my grandfather!
This was actually something established back in the game shop as Grandpa was reminiscing about the Blue Eyes.
I'm sure you could, but this card is worth more to me than you could ever offer.
The oboe even plays the melody to that friendship theme for the first time, when Taya draws the smiley face on their hands.
Everyone, put your hands together, and I'll mark us with a special sign.
What gives, Taya?
But then we get stuff like Exodia, where anything relevant to him gets this vaguely exotic-sounding interjection, which is a bit more invasive.
Duel Monsters contains only one unstoppable monster, Exodia.
Another piece of the puzzle! The unstoppable Exodia!
The original version also uses certain summons as musical cues, however I'd argue the overall drive behind the battle is something slightly different. Which leads us to what's probably the most important track in the Japanese version, Passionate Duelist. This track could be considered the main theme of the show, with countless rearrangements throughout this OST. Its presence usually comes as Yugi throws down the gauntlet when transforming, or during a decisive moment in a match. Its most defining feature is the parallel octaves, creating open resonance, which I think draws more attention towards an active melody as opposed to fully voiced chords. Furthermore, while the lower voices use E-flat to create a G minor tonality, the melody is still able to distinguish itself with E natural instead, in the vein of G Dorian mode. The charge of this bold melody is led by the violins, supported by Chilean bass, given some occasional emphasis by the percussion, and eventually challenged by a secondary horn melody. All this emphasis on a tonally neutral melody line that carries such a large sense of scale with its parallel octaves really evokes the raw thrill of the game itself. It doesn't quite code either side as hero or villain, but rather it expresses the rush that comes from seeing the tides turn between the two. Whether or not any of this was the intention, Yu-Gi-Oh! Has always been a series driven by a passion for games, even back in the original manga, so the fact that this track recurs so often in the series, either in rearrangements or wholesale, makes it feel like a genuine mission statement. This isn't to say the Japanese version doesn't express the moral conflict inherent to this duel, however by and large, I'd say the dub music serves to highlight the good versus evil aspect of the duel more.
Don't give up, Yugi!
I won't give up. Grandpa's counting on me.
While the original is more focused on the flow of the game, just comparing the different kinds of tempo and atmosphere it employs, And even the fact that it uses silence to create tension between turns sells that.
デッキにはあと2枚のブルーアイズも揃っている。お前に勝ち目はない。
To make this difference in approach even more clear, let's have a look at where exactly Passionate Duelist plays in this episode. The first time is during Yugi's transformation into the Pharaoh, and as many of us know in the 4Kids dub, they use an arrangement of the main Yu-Gi-Oh theme from the opening. Both of these are equally strong statements relative to their respective versions, but there's still more. The second time Passionate Duelist plays is over a 4-turn stretch near the end. Yugi's got all but one of the Exodia pieces, the 2 most famous cards do battle, and before we know it, he's facing down 3 Blue Eyes White Dragons. Again, the sheer thrill generated by the game is what takes precedence in the Japanese score, and at this very moment in the dub we get...
So tell me, Yugi, how's your faith now? On my next turn, all 3 Blue Eyes White Dragons are free to attack. This game's over no matter what card you draw.
Where does this melody come from?
If you can't, it certainly wouldn't surprise me.
Seto Kaiba!
Kaiba!
And before that... The main body of the American Yu-Gi-Oh! Opening just involves 2 melodies going head-to-head. A villainous one set to footage of monsters fighting...
It's time to
and a heroic one set to shots of the main cast glaring at the camera. Even before an episode begins, the American opening has already framed this overbearing good versus evil conceit with these 2 iconic melodies. All those menacing cello cues meant to villainize Kaiba are actually consistent with this goal. While 4Kids' constant stream of superficial musical observations can get monotonous, the step-by-step nature of it means that it can take opportunities to create payoffs that the Japanese version cannot. While it's definitely impressive that this series of card plays gains momentum from a single track, when it comes to this moment with Yugi's friends, Passionate Duelist doesn't seem to have a whole lot to add. We're still kind of stuck in the thrill of the game, and can't really appreciate this transcendent, albeit incredibly cheesy, moment of warmth. Meanwhile, in the American version, the theme associated with friendship that was established before comes gushing in.
Yugi, we're right here with you.
Yugi, you've got to believe in yourself.
The notion of friends being there for you when you need them most is expressed musically, and it's something that actually deserves its own little moments because of its context in the story. In fact, it's the driving force from the beginning right up till the end.
Please, Puzzle, grant my wish! And my wish did come true, the day I met my friends.
I still appreciate the 4Kids music, and the original isn't quite art house anyway, but I do think it's worth pointing out how the Japanese soundtrack was able to do so much with comparatively less. We may fondly remember the American score for how it held our hand every step of the way, but sometimes things can have more meaning when they aren't fed to you in such easily digestible little bits. So in the end, which one is better? I'm gonna let you decide that for yourselves. The US music is what I grew up with, but it's not hard to see how the Japanese version handled the story with a fair bit more subtlety. But again, sometimes you have to wonder how far subtlety goes in a world run by children's card games. Say what you will about it, but the 4Kids music was able to tap into that immaturity inherent to Yu-Gi-Oh's premise to create a brand new story that still had a likable and distinct charm to it. Which is more than what I can say for their treatment of some other titles.
Yo!
Anyway, let me know which version of the Yu-Gi-Oh! Soundtrack you prefer, as well as if you agree or disagree with my interpretations of them. Are there any other moments from shows with redone American scores you'd like me to have a look at in video form? Let me know on social media, and until next time.